Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. You know, we're out on some corn stalks right now, and it's going to be soybeans here next year. And one of the big things that I enjoy doing, spend a lot of time doing over the summer, is looking at different soybean varieties. We're going to discuss picking soybean varieties on today's program.
A few weeks ago on our radio show, we had a caller call in and we were talking a little bit about milo, about sorghum. And he said, why don't you guys ever talk about that on the TV show? So we said, sure, we'd love to talk about that on TV. The issue is with sorghum, it's not on as many acres. We don't have a lot of the options we do for corn and some of the other crops, but we will talk through all the options and how to get the best yield on your farm this year with milo or sorghum.
Well, it's important in any crop to control our weed of the week, so we'll show you how to do that later in the show. But first, here's today's Farm Basics.
Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk about a huge issue to non-farmers, and that is fertilizer, or what Darren and I call plant food.
All right, if we're going to be using fertilizer or plant food for our crops, for farmers, they want to try and minimize their costs. They want it to be the least expensive that it can possibly be because fertilizer is very expensive for farmers. Now, if you're a non-farmer, you're probably thinking, well, I don't want farmers to apply any more fertilizer than they absolutely have to. Hey, guess what? We're on the same page here. We totally agree with you. Farmers and non-farmers can completely agree on this. Now, when we're using plant food, what we want to do to minimize the expense for farmers and also to be the best we can be environmentally speaking, we want to use that fertilizer efficiently. So there are a few things that farmers are doing. One of those topics that we're going to discuss is called banding. And another thing that we do is split apply or spoon feed the crop.
Before we go any further too, let me just say there are a lot of people that will say, oh, you can't use fertilizer and all these pesticides and everything else and these unnatural products. I'm going, how do you get more natural than fertilizer? We dig it out of the ground and we spread it over a field. That sounds pretty natural to me. It's no big deal. It's in nature already. We're just spreading it out on the field. But to take it a step further, what we want to try to do is spread it at the right rates in the right areas of fields. So what we will do to get the best efficiency out of any fertilizer product we're going to use is first understand our soil. That's why having a good soil test is incredibly helpful. So what farmers will do is they will grid sample on their farms quite often. We have even the free Ag PhD soil test app that allows you to grid sample using your smartphone just to bring you to certain areas of the field. You pull a sample, throw it in a bag, and then you get results back. By grids, what we're talking about here is basically kind of like tic-tac-toe, where you draw some vertical lines, you draw some horizontal lines in your field, you set it up so you've got 5-acre little squares, or maybe it's 2.5-acre squares depending on what you pick for your farm. But on our farm, it's mostly 5 acres. So in every 5 acres, we go to a spot, we pull a few cores of soil, mix those together, send it in for analysis. That's how we do a grid sample.
All right, so we figure out what nutrients we need to apply to that acre to deliver the right nutrition to our crop. The next thing that we'll do is figure out when to put that out there. And when I talked about spoon feeding the crop, what farmers will look at is when does that crop actually take the fertility up? So for example, will there be some fertility put on in the fall? Certainly there will be. We've got all this residue out here, and this residue from this year's crop needs to break down. And so all the little soil microbes are going to require some level of fertility out there, especially nitrogen, to start breaking down some of that residue. And then early in the spring, we want to have this fertilizer available for the crop. So when those little seedlings get started in the spring, they have plenty of food. Then as that crop starts growing a little bit taller, farmers will make another application of plant food out there so those plants can continue to grow. And by putting out a little bit at a time, as many farmers will do, especially in lighter soils and soils where we're just concerned about holding all that plant food at any one time, farmers have found they get better gains with lower amounts of fertilizer that way.
So that's what we call spoon feeding. Banding is the other big thing when it comes to getting the most efficiency on the farm. Most university studies will show that the immobile nutrients, things like phosphorus, potassium, zinc, that don't move very well with water in the soil, if you ban those, in other words, put those right in the row where the plant can absorb that fertilizer pretty quickly, you can use a lot less fertilizer. In many cases, 30–35% less fertilizer than if you were to spread it across the entire
and let's
field.
just contrast that to your lawn. If you ever spread fertilizer or plant food across your lawn, well, you spread it everywhere and it blew all across the lawn and you put it out nice and even everywhere. Well, that's fine, because in your lawn, you've got a plant just literally in every square inch of the entire yard. But in fields like this cornfield that we're standing in, there's only a plant every 30 inches out here. So by banning, we're just putting fertilizer in a little strip every 30 inches through the field so the crop can take it up the most efficiently.
The other thing is, when we talk about efficiency, if you place the fertilizer down in the soil a little bit and have it in a concentrated band, then there's less chance for erosion. There's also less chance that you're going to get tie-up from other soil nutrients. Because what can happen quite often to farmers, we talk about this very often with farmers and phosphorus, is they spread a bunch of phosphorus out there and the calcium or the aluminum or the iron or something in their soil will bind together with the phosphorus before the phosphorus gets into the plant. So you got phosphorus in the field, but it's sitting there in a form that the plant can't absorb. That's not good for the farmer. He doesn't want that either. So by banning the fertilizer, he has less chance for that tie-up because it's in a concentrated band. That's more efficient.
Well, it's certainly a great story for farmers across the country to tell about how they're managing the plant food that they're putting out on their fields and how they're doing it efficiently so they can apply less plant food but still get maximum crop yields. One other thing that farmers are very careful about in their fields is controlling our weed of the week. We'll show you how coming up later in the show.
What's next in weed control technology? Roundup Ready 2 Extend soybeans will provide tolerance to dicamba and glyphosate and will be built on the Genuity Roundup Ready to Yield trait. See them in action at extendfollowafield.com.
How will you secure your farm for the future? The Quasar Chopping Cornhead from Capello USA will help. Our design is focused on efficiency, longevity, and reducing harvest loss, making the Quasar the corn harvest solution to bring your farm forward. With hundreds of units ready for immediate delivery, secure your farm's future today. Do it for your farm. Do it for them. Order now. Capello USA. Italian craftsmanship, American grit.
Wake up, breakfast is served. Your roots crave pea. Most of your applied pea gets tied up in the soil, a natural phenomenon known as phosphorus fixation. Fix the problem with Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Avail makes more pea available to your roots, here, here, and here. Increasing pea availability can lead to increased pea uptake in the plant. That's more pea, and more pea. More phosphorus for your crop can mean more results in your bin. An average of 9.6 bushels per acre of corn. Breakfast is served. Supercharge your pea with Avail.
This year's projected U.S. soybean yield will lose over $500 million per point in shrink. Eliminate shrink in your bin. Store grain without lowering moisture content with the AgriDrive Bullseye Temperature and Moisture Controller. The Bullseye monitors air temperature and relative humidity, allowing your fans to utilize the weather's natural condition to maintain your grain at market moisture. Fan run times drastically decrease along with the cost of over-drying. Eliminate shrink today. Call now.
My data is mine, not mined.
Mine to share,
mine to keep.
It's mine when I want it.
Mine where I want it.
And only mine.
My data is mine to analyze.
Mine to put to work.
Mine to control.
It's mine.
The AFS Connect Farm Management System from Case IH connects you, and only you, to the information you need most from your equipment, from anywhere, at any time. AFS Connect, only from Case IH.
A proven herbicide for decades, dicamba can provide burn-down residual control of tough and resistant weeds for up to 14 days. That's another reason why farmers will use dicamba for years to come. Brought to you by Roundup Ready Plus Weed Management Solutions.
There are lots of different types of sorghum out there, from grain sorghum, sweet sorghum, forage. There's also sorghum Sudan grass, a number of different types. So we're going to talk about some products, some concepts today, things you might consider doing on your farm if you're raising sorghum. But just make sure, especially with pesticides, that you check the label for your particular type of sorghum so you're not using something that's off-label or could potentially hurt the crop.
Okay, first of all, when we're talking about seed, you got to be really fussy about what you're getting. I've talked to a number of farmers over the years that went to pick pick up one type of sorghum from a dealer and ended up with something else.
Yep.
And you certainly don't want that to happen to you. You don't want a surprise if you're expecting grain sorghum and you get something else. The other thing as you're picking that seed up is make sure you get seed that's concept treated. I just think that's critical. You've got to have good weed control, and to be able to use things like Dual and Outlook that are going to wipe out almost all the grass in your field, you got to have concept treated in order for it to be safe for that sorghum. Make sure you're talking to your seed dealer so you can meet your needs with the sorghum seed you're getting.
Since you did mention already herbicides, let's get into that a little bit more. Pre-emerge, we do recommend using either Dual or Outlook. There's also Sharpen that can be used on grain sorghum. Sharpen's an excellent product at controlling broadleaf weeds. Doesn't help you on the grass, but it's great on broadleaves. Now certainly post-emerge, we have broadleaf options already, like Banvel, Clarity. You could even use Starane if you wanted to control kochia. You can throw a little atrazine in with your Banvel or Clarity. So we do have some choices there that are pretty good for broadleaves, but if you want a little added pre-emerge kick, you can certainly use that Sharpen on grain sorghum.
All right, when you look at the grass control, we talked about the Dual and Outlook. Post-emerge, we get questions every year, hey, I had some grass escapes, or I didn't get my pre-emerge down, or I didn't get enough rain to really activate that pre-emerge in time, and now I have some grass escapes coming. You can use a product called Paramount. It's the same chemistry that we've been using in the turf industry for a long time with a product called Drive that does a nice job on annual grasses, but you have to get out there early. You can't let them get big like you could bring them down with Roundup or something in other crops or in a burn down. You got to get those grasses when they're really small, but Paramount can be effective.
But the problem, Darren, is it's expensive. That's what everybody says. But here's what I come back to, okay? Grain sorghum, forage sorghum, any of those sorghums, they're grasses, right? And what hurts grass the most? It's early season grass weeds. So if we can get those grasses under control both pre and post, if you have grass weeds, use the Paramount. I know it costs a little bit of money, but it generally speaking comes back pretty quickly in yield and dollars on the other end.
Well,
so make sure you have good grass control.
Especially when we look at sorghum and it's grown in areas where it's typically drier.
Yep.
You just can't afford to have weed problems when you're looking at dry situations because weeds are going to take moisture away from your crop. So you have to wipe those weeds out. That's number one with any of these types of sorghum if you want to be successful.
All right, I'm glad you brought up the dry conditions. A lot of people will plant sorghum because it's a low input crop and it'll survive drought and things like that. I want you to think about drought. Okay, this is something a lot of people don't realize. If you have the right balance of nutrients in your soil, you actually have a more drought tolerant crop. Here's why. Because if your sorghum is short on any one nutrient, you know what it starts doing? Even if it doesn't need water yet, it starts bringing in more water because that's how it gets its nutrients. So if you don't have the right balance of nutrients, if you end up with your plant being deficient in one particular nutrient, it starts wasting water. That's not a good thing when we're talking about a crop that's raised typically in drought areas.
Well, okay, and speaking specifically about nutrients, I think N, P, and K and sulfur really now, to a broader degree than it was just a few years back, are being managed fairly well. If you're applying N, P, and K and some sulfur to your sorghum, hey, you're probably getting most of the things right. The big one to not forget is the micronutrients. Now, I realize that's several nutrients that we're talking about there, but definitely watch the micronutrients. We've seen really nice response in many crops, including sorghum, by putting micronutrients out there. We've also seen better drought tolerance, which also comes to be a big factor many times in sorghum.
Okay, if you're looking for, well, how many nutrients do I need? We encourage you, because there are a lot of different types of sorghum and your yield goal is different than the next guy's, go to the Ag PhD fertilizer removal app. It's a free download for your iPad or your smartphone, and then you can punch up the type of sorghum you have and your yield goal and just see, or how many tons of forage you're expecting to have or anything like that. And you can get the list of all the different nutrients and how many you need to raise that crop.
Well, we don't normally have a whole lot of disease issues in drier areas of the country, so we aren't spraying a lot of foliar or fungicides for disease control, but that may be something you take a look at too in terms of just helping your overall plant health with a fungicide application, especially with one of the strobilurins like a headline, for example. Then when it comes to bugs, we have to be really fussy when we're in drier areas of the country with bugs. If we've got insects out there feeding on our crop just cannot tolerate as many insects in low moisture environments as they can in high moisture environments. So keep scouting your sorghum all throughout the season. Watch for bugs, and when needed, apply some insecticide to control them.
Yeah, the only thing I'd caution you on there, the pyrethroids are inexpensive and they mix pretty well with a lot of other herbicides. Be careful if you want to use Lorsban, because especially if you were to put Lorsban together with a Banvel or Clarity or a foliar fertilizer or something like that, it could get pretty hot. So just make sure you're cautious on which insecticide you're using if you start doing some tank mixing mixing. Most of the pyrethroids, though, would be just fine.
Well, sorghum is another crop that really responds to management. So we talked about fertility, weed, insect, and disease control. And there's just a number of factors that you have to take into play. And also, when you're in drier areas of the country, we just have to be very conscious that we can't allow weeds and insects to compete against our crop if we want to be successful.
Well, speaking of weeds, we've got a tough to control weed of the week. That's coming up later in the show.
For lower cost, higher production, Mandaco Agri leads with versatility unmatched. Twister is the vertical tillage unit for no-till as well as conventional tillage. Twister's ease of maintenance is forgiving in rocks and has contour conformity equaling zero downtime. Our hydraulically adjusted coulter angles make residue management easier, less costly. Spring or fall, the Mandaco Twister vertical tillage unit is the new leader. See your Mandaco Agri dealer. Visit northcountrymarketing.biz or call.
You expect a lot from this seed, and as it grows through each stage of development, Agroculture Liquid Fertilizers is there, feeding your crop exactly what it needs when it needs it. So no matter how you fertilize, no matter when, AgroLiquid efficiently brings all the nutrients your crop needs for a great harvest. From 1 kernel in the ground to 600 on the ear. For better yields and better quality, Agroculture Liquid Fertilizers.
Dirty work pays. That is if your dirty work includes a SoilMax Gold Digger tile plow. SoilMax tile plows feature zero deflection technology. With the only tile plow factory paired with Ag Leader's IntelliSlope control system, you eliminate the need for grade calculations and lasers. So make your next investment in a SoilMax Gold Digger. Better yield, longer planting and harvest windows, better water management is all yours with SoilMax. Visit soilmax.com.
Working in agriculture over the past 3 decades, I saw a need for an accurate way to apply dry product to seed. That's where our Changing Times applicators come in. The CT applicator brush sifts powder into small particles, resulting in proper distribution. Quantities can be adjusted by the speed of the brush rotation. This allows for even and accurate distribution of product. Application at the time of planting can be used with any seed delivery system and saves farmers time, labor, and money. Remember, CT applicators for the changing times.
Some prefer to invest in fields halfway around the world, in short-term solutions to long-term challenges. At Poet, we're investing in the fields we have right here at home, cultivating communities and growing the local economy, creating new local jobs while we create worldwide energy solutions, helping family farms grow even as they fuel the world. Because we know that investing in a community can pay global dividends. See the world differently with Poet.
All the time, Darren and I get asked, well, how do you raise better soybeans? Where it starts is you got to pick the right soybean variety. But Darren, I think that's challenging. Well, actually, I know it's challenging. That's why I make Darren do it for our farm.
You make Darren do it? I don't know. You know, you have to love what you're doing. One thing I do love doing is looking at different varieties of soybeans because there's so many things that you have to choose from. Just like in corn, we want to look at those defensive traits that we absolutely have to have. That's just critical if you want to be successful with soybeans. Then we can start looking at which beans are going to be more offensive and what management techniques we can use.
Yeah, but Darren, I want the highest yield. Which one's going to yield highest this year?
I do want the highest yield, you know, and I can't tell you if 2015 is going to be a wet year, a dry year, a hot year, a cold year. So we've got to look across a variety of environments. For example, in 2014, we had a lot of disease issues. We had white mold, we had sudden death syndrome, we had some other things showing up as well. We've got to start with a good seed treatment. That's going to kind of even the playing field out for a lot of these varieties. So if we start with a good seed treatment, we can wipe out some of the early season disease and insect problems that we would normally face. Otherwise, though, we have to have good soybean cyst nematode varieties for those environments. We saw some guys that were pushing non-cyst resistant varieties into areas where they shouldn't. They definitely paid a yield penalty this year.
All right, so you talked about diseases a little bit. Every company rates their varieties a little different for diseases. So how do I sort that out? If I'm looking at 3 different companies, their soybeans, how do I know if this particular one is better than the other company's variety?
Well, that's tough to do. And the other thing is when they're making the ratings, like on sudden death syndrome this year, we saw it in some areas of the country and other areas we didn't. And in fact, right across the road, we may see the same variety planted a week different, and the early planted stuff had sudden death. The late planted stuff did not. Now, if we only had the one field, we'd say, wow, that variety is fantastic on sudden death syndrome. We didn't see any, and there's a whole bunch in the area. However, we did see it where it was planted early, and it had sudden death just like the rest of them. So we've got to find the right environments for where that disease is present in order to make good recommendations for those varieties.
All right, how about the plant type? Does it really make a difference if I'm on narrow rows or wide rows?
All right, well, that is where I really see a difference in soybean varieties. What I'm looking at is soybean varieties that are going to bush out and have lots of branches with lots of pods on them. And when you break those side branches off and start stacking them up, and you say, wow, if I had one single stem soybean plant, I would have to be 7 feet tall in order to get the yield I'm getting out of the 2 foot tall bushy soybean variety. And then when we look at row spacing, we definitely see as we move further north in the country a response to narrowing up that row spacing. So we have to find varieties that can handle tight row spacing in order to maximize yield potential.
Last thing, how many of these new varieties should I be planting, and how many varieties total should I put on the farm?
Depending on the size of your farm, maybe 3 or 4 varieties is a manageable number. Maybe you may want some more difference in maturity zones or something to spread out your harvest a little bit. That's just a few of the things that you have to consider for your farm. And then as far as planting new varieties, I love planting new varieties. It's very rare that I'll hold on to a variety more than 2 or maybe 3 years because the ones that are coming are better. That's the reason seed companies are bringing them out.
The last thing I would say is a lot of people are looking for a low price on soybeans because commodity prices are down, and I get that, and as long as it's yielding pretty close to another variety, that's fine. But if you've got another variety, even if it costs $8 or $10 more, if you get 2 to 4 bushels more, it more than paid for itself. So just look real close at that.
When it comes to picking soybean varieties, many farmers may choose the right variety based on what weed control options there are to kill weeds like our Weed of the Week. We'll show you what'll stop this tough weed coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is sponsored by the Enlist Weed Control System from Dow AgroSciences, a new herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate.
Farming isn't just in the land, it's in you. Take control of weeds like never before. Enlist builds on the Roundup Ready system, combining proven control of a new 2,4-D and glyphosate in Enlist Duo herbicide. Protect what matters without changing the way you farm. Talk to your seed or crop protection supplier today.
Our Weed of the Week is knotweed.
Well, it's also called prostrate knotweed, and the reason why
easy for you to say. I was struggling with that one.
The reason why is it's going to be low to the ground. We see this real commonly around farmyards, and your best bet to control it if you find it there is just using a good strong rate of 2,4-D early in the spring and again late in the fall.
Well, hold on. I like using Sharpen. Sharpen is just such a nice burn down product for broadleaf weeds.
Yeah,
like
I'm talking
knotweed.
in my lawn, I'm not going to use Sharpen.
All right, well, in a lawn, that's one thing, but when I'm out in crop fields, I really like using Sharpen, whether it's using Verdict in corn or just using straight Sharpen either in soybeans or wheat. It does a nice job burning down knotweed, and typically knotweed's one of the first weeds that's emerging in the spring. So if you're out there and you say, well, I did some fall tillage, but man, I got some green weeds that are just making a mat out in my field, chances are it could be knotweed.
Well, I'm with you on the Sharpen thing for corn and for wheat. I would prefer Authority MTZ down in soybeans. Post-emergent soybeans though, Roundup, Liberty, Cadet has some activity, but there's nothing real great other than Roundup and Liberty. If you go to wheat, normally we talk about Husky and Wide Match. They're not outstanding on knotweed. We find the Addition products like Addition Broad Spec to be better.
And in corn post-emerge, we fall back on Status. It does a nice job on these, weeds of minor significance across most of the corn belt. Little weeds, we'd call them manure weeds, like knotweed. If you use Status, it just wipes them out, but you need to do that early in the season to avoid any volatility or drift issues, and also for the safety of your crop.
Well, once again, our Weed of the Week was prostrate knotweed. And that's it for this week's weed, but stay tuned. Iron Talk is coming up next.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
The AFS Connect Farm Management System from Case IH connects you, and only you, to the information you need most from your equipment, from anywhere, at any time. AFS Connect, only from Case IH.
Drainage tile work got a later than normal start on many farms this fall, and it continues where weather permits. One of the big projects farmers were working on was increasing the amount of tile in certain areas of the fields. I'll explain in today's Iron Talk. Owning your own tile plow is pretty handy sometimes, especially when you have some problem areas in your fields. Fixing iron deficiency chlorosis spots in soybeans or alkali areas is a great example. When you have an area where water sits on the soil surface for a few extra days after a rain, you could be setting yourself up for a buildup of salts, carbonates, and nitrates, as well as high and rising soil pH. In most cases, improving the drainage will solve the problem for the long term. However, how close should you put the tile spacings? What many farmers are finding out is that soil is a little heavy in these areas of the field. That's a good thing for crop production potential, but it requires drain tile lines to be placed much closer together to be effective. Farmers with 100-foot tile spacings are narrowing them up to 50 feet or even 25 feet. In the IDC or alkali areas, we see many farmers having great success taking these small areas of the field and putting tile in at 10 to 15-foot spacings and keeping them shallow at only 2.5 to 3 feet deep. I realize 10 to 15 feet spacings, that sounds expensive and it sounds excessive, but it really isn't. It's really what's needed in these small areas of the field. And when you look at how many actual acres you're tiling this way, it doesn't end up to be a whole lot. But it can solve these areas for a long period of time. This can turn slow draining problem areas into productive areas that are going to yield like the rest of your field will. Try this approach on just a few areas on your farm this year. I'm confident you'll like the difference it can make. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show. It's easy to stay busy on your farm over the winter, hauling grain, getting ready for next spring, or a host of other jobs that always seem pressing. However, if you want to make 2015 your best year ever, it's important to invest some of your time learning. I invite you to spend at least one day attending a free Ag PhD workshop. We have a new format, new information, and more tips to help you improve your yield and, most importantly, your profits. Go to agphd.com and register today.
No one understands your farm, your field, and your soil like you. I'm Myron Stein, and at Stein Seed Company, we know your field demands a choice. That's why Stein's corn breeding program combines our industry-leading genetics and superior standability with the most sought-after traits, giving you the best choices for maximum yield. Learn more about Stein's hybrid lineup by visiting steinseed.com or contacting your local Stein Seed dealer.
A farmer's attention to detail is what makes the difference. You take the time for service management because you know how vital it is to your operation. You service your field like everything else because soil sampling makes all the difference and gets the results you want. Download the app Soil Test Pro and start grid sampling today. Keep your farm growing strong. The more you test, the more you know.
For lower cost, higher production, Mandako Agri leads with versatility unmatched. Twister is the vertical tillage unit for no-till as well as conventional tillage. Twister's ease of maintenance is forgiving and rocks and has contour conformity equaling zero downtime. Our hydraulically adjusted coulter angles make residue management easier, less costly. Spring or fall, the Mandako Twister vertical tillage unit is the new leader. See your Mandako Agri dealer. Visit northcountrymarketing.biz or call.
Looking to maximize yield? Quick Roots is a microbial seed inoculant that allows the plant root to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. Quick Roots continues to generate yield response on corn, soybeans, wheat, and more. Quick Roots is applied to the seed so the live microorganisms go right to work, enhancing seedling vigor, increasing the uptake of certain nutrients, including NPK, and expanding root volume. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your local dealer and get your Quick Roots today.
Closed captioning for Ag PhD is sponsored by Norwood Sales.
On your farm, you need speed and year-round effectiveness in your tillage program. The Quick Till from Norwood Sales allows you to move quickly through your fields, maximizing time and improving yield. Constructed of heavy-duty materials, the Quick Till is ideal for both spring and fall applications, from preparing a healthy seedbed early in the season to breaking up corn residue after harvest. For more information about how a Quick Till can improve fields on your farm, call Norwood Sales today.
That's all the time we have for today's show, but if you're looking for more agronomic information, we invite you to tune in to SiriusXM Channel 80, that's the rural radio channel, for the live Ag PhD radio show each weekday at 2 p.m. Central.
And don't miss the next Ag PhD television program where we have another Weed of the Week, Farm Basics Iron Talk, and a whole lot more. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.
Why are many farmers reducing tillage? Reduced tillage has shown to increase soil's organic matter levels, reduce erosion potential, improve soil structure, and increase microbial activity and soil life. For more information, visit the Responsible Nutrient Management Foundation at rnmf.org.